This is a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District PTSA.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We are, as you can see in the back, we will be recording this presentation. So if you have any questions, the presentation will probably be up on our website within about 2 to 3 weeks, as well as with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So don't feel like you have to rush to write everything down. You will have access to a lot of the information. It's a great presentation, but since it is being recorded, we just ask, you're certainly more than welcome to ask any questions that you like, but keep in mind that this will be something that people will be able to pull and draw information from regularly. If you want to keep it more general or not child specific or not teacher specific, and then after the recording is turned off, you're more than welcome to ask any other questions that you would like. So to start the presentation, I would like to introduce Dr. Whitney Rapp. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad all of you are here. Big crowd, it's awesome. I want to ask first, was there anybody that attended? I did this last year, once at the high school and once here for a PTSA meeting. Was there anyone who's seen this presentation before? So a few repeaters. Okay, so there might be a few new things, but I'll let you know I was asked to do the same presentation again, so you'll hear a lot of the same things, but hopefully that'll help reinforce some of the information in your minds. And I think I do have a couple of new things, and your questions are always different every time, so you'll benefit from that too. And then my second question is if you'll give me a quick fist to 5 of how familiar you are with executive functioning, executive functions, how they work. Fist is you've never heard of it before, all the way up to 5, you know everything about it, and I should just sit down. All right. Pretty big range. Okay, so that said, people who haven't heard of it before or just hearing about it for the first time, and people who seem to have read a lot and know a lot about it. So if you have anything to add anytime along the way, I'm more than happy to hear that, and I still think there might be something that's new to everybody. So. All right, so I have been researching executive functioning and supports for kids who have difficulty with their executive functioning for years now in 2 different roles. One as Associate Professor of Inclusive Education at St. John Fisher College. That's what I do for my day job. And I'm also a mom of 3 kids. I have 2 boys in college, and I have a daughter who's a junior in high school. And over the years, at least a couple of them have needed different supports, some more intensely than others for their executive functions. So done a lot of reading, a lot of trial and error, a lot of tweaking of strategies, and have what I hope will be helpful things for you tonight. I'm going to make 2 disclaimers right off the bat. We have about an hour, so I can kind of just do the tip of the iceberg in an hour. There's a lot here. I'm going to give you an overview of what it is, how it works, and some ideas to start with. There's always going to be more to learn. So I'm going to talk through a lot and try to answer questions as best I can. And I'll leave my email at the end for any additional questions that are really specific so that I can delve deeper into any particular area that could be helpful to you individually. Second disclaimer is nothing I'm going to offer here tonight is a magic wand. So if you're hoping to come in because you see that your kid's a disorganized mess and fairly dysfunctional and hope I'll have a few strategies that are just going to be a magic wand and everything's going to be way better, I can't offer that to you. Because the best thing I can do is change a dysfunctional slob into a functional slob. But their nature is always going to be their nature. But we can, like I said, the key is getting to be functional and on top of things, even though they might not look as neat and tidy as the next kid. So what are executive functions? There's actually 2 strands. This comes from a researcher named Christopher Kaufman, and they are metacognitive. One strand is metacognitive, academic skills, but that's separate from your cognition or your intelligence. So it's not the things that you can do cognitively, like reading and writing and math and science and music and art. They are the skills, metacognitive skills surrounding those that kind of direct when you use your cognitive abilities. So it's things like goal setting, planning and strategizing, sequencing, prioritizing, what should I do first, what can I leave to later type of thing. Organizing materials, that seems to be a pretty common characteristic for parents who are concerned. Lost materials, bringing the wrong things home from school, getting back to school with the wrong materials. Time management, task initiation, starting a task, knowing where the end point is, what is it they need to accomplish, and then being able to direct themselves from point A to point B, and then finishing task persistence right to the end, and being able to get to that last step of the task. Working memory. So if you're familiar with short-term memory and then long-term memory, after you've processed something through your short-term memory and stored it in your long-term memory, when you take something back out of your long-term memory and work with it, that's your working memory. And so if your working memory is very strong, then it's like having a nice big giant desktop in front of you. You can take a whole bunch of stuff out of your long-term memory, spread it out, look it over, pay attention to a lot of things at the same time without losing it. If you don't have a strong working memory, it's like having just a tiny little desktop, and you might be able to take one or two things out at a time. But if you take too much out, something's going to fall off, get lost. You won't pay attention to it, you'll forget about it, and then maybe you won't put it back into long-term storage in the right place where you need it next time. So working memory is that desktop where you are handling all of the tasks that you need to handle. And then set shifting is what is often referred to as multitasking. Has anybody heard or read something that multitasking doesn't really exist? And that's essentially true. We don't really do two or more things at a time. What we do is we shift between things, and then we transition back to the one we were doing before. So you're not really doing two things at the same time, but you can handle two things at a time because you can switch back and forth pretty fluidly. So kids who have difficulty with their executive functions, with these skills, they don't transition very well, or if they do transition, they can't get back to the first thing, find their place, and continue off where they are. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy for them to be able to do that. So we ask kids to set shift in classes in the middle school and the high school all the time, because they're constantly shifting from one thing to another. They have several classes, they have their music lessons, they have their sports, they have their clubs, and every different task that they have for a different teacher in a different context is a whole different set to shift back and forth. And then if they have a class where they have a daily assignment and a weekly assignment and then a long-term assignment going on at the same time, then that's a whole nother layer of set shifting that they're being asked to do. And then the other strand is the social emotional regulation strand. So the same neurology that's in charge of this metacognitive academic task stuff is in charge of your social emotional regulation. So things like response inhibition or impulse control, emotional control, knowing which emotion is appropriate and how much of that emotion to express in a given situation. And then adaptability, which is being able to, like set shifting, move from one setting to another and exhibit appropriate social skills for that setting. So knowing that you can say something at home that you might not say in class, that you might not say with your friends, and so on. There's a different set of social rules for every situation you're in. So not every kid is going to have trouble with all of these. Some maybe only a couple, maybe one real problem in the metacognitive list and one issue in the social emotional regulation list, or maybe most of their stuff is the academic tasks and not the social, or vice versa. So everybody's a little bit different. And for the most part, that's because your executive functions are neurological. And everybody's neurology is like a fingerprint, very, very different. You're never going to meet two kids the same. So it is hardwired, essentially, your neurology. And executive functions will mature over time, okay? So there's some hope. Brains mature into our 20s, for females generally into early 20s, for males late 20s, and there's been some studies that show into early 30s. Brain is still maturing to adulthood. So when we graduate kids out of high school at 18-ish, their bodies might be physically adult, their brains are not. They're still young teenage brains. They're not done growing up yet. So there's time. And as their brains do reach adulthood, into their 20s and maybe even 30s, you will see their executive functioning and their social skill abilities improve. But again, what you have is what you have. So you've got this range here when they're young. It will improve, but there's still going to be a range. So there's still going to be folks who are much stronger at these things than others. So, but they will shift, I promise. I've seen it with my own eyes. Your neurology is affected by diet. Natural foods are better. Processed foods wreak havoc on your neurology. Sleep, exercise, hormones, stress, the weather, sunshine. Okay? They all affect how well your executive functions work. So, they also wax and wane, which means that you could possibly see a kid be really on with something, really organized one week and get all their homework in, and the next week not so much. And you think to yourself, or a teacher might say, I saw you do it last week, you were on last week, this week you're just being lazy. Not so. They really will wax and wane the abilities. They might have them one week and they might slide back a little the next, or month to month or something. And that's because our neurology is inconsistent in development. We don't see a steady track like we do with our height, physical growth, where you just go on a nice smooth incline at some point. With your brain development, you'll go, maybe take a step back, go again, take a step back, go again. So you do get higher over time, but there's dips. It's a jagged incline. So we can expect some regression. And if any of these things are off, puberty, then we're going to see some differences in what they can manage, how much they can manage. All right, so what does that mean for school and at home? So let's talk a minute about what a cognitive task is versus an associative task. For us, typically, for adults, things that we would consider a cognitive task, something that takes all of our concentration, might be hard for us to do. We can't deal with the kids at the same time that we're doing these things. Solving math problems, writing an editorial, reading a really scientific research article, doing your taxes, pretty much you're just doing that, not doing much else. Takes all of your cognitive focus. And then for us, associative tasks might be something like driving, talking to a friend or your partner, making lunches, sorting the mail, checking on dinner, packing your work bag, talking on the phone, things you could do, and still you could talk on the phone and sort through the mail, or you can drive and make the kids lunches while you're sorting through the mail. Generally, they become second nature, and we can do them without thinking about them too much. For kids, cognitive things that we ask them to do in school are going to be pretty similar: math, writing, reading, taking a test. And some things that we might expect to be associative, things that could become second nature to them, that they should be able to do pretty easily without thinking too much about in the daily life of a student: heading a paper, packing a school bag, writing in their planner, putting their papers away in their folders, talking with their friends. For a kid with executive functioning difficulty, all of those things are cognitive tasks. They all take their full attention. They are all like doing their taxes, including talking with their friends. It takes all of their focus and all of their energy, and it is a cognitive task, and may never become second nature. It might be something that they always really need to concentrate on and think hard about how they're doing it. All right, so if you think about, this is our daily processing load, we get that much. Right? A student who has strong executive functions, doesn't have difficulty in any of those skills that I listed out, they might use up that much brain energy, heading their paper, putting their papers away in their folders, packing their school bag. They've got all that green area left to do the math, do the reading, do the writing, socializing, things like that. Students who have difficulty in executive functions, those types of clerical tasks might take up that much of their brain energy. So by the time they've sorted through their folders for their papers and they've headed their paper, they only have that much green area left to actually do the math or write the essay or act appropriately socially in the cafeteria, and then switch gears and voice level when they get to the classroom. So, all right, high cognitive load doing those types of things. All right, that famous question, did you do your homework? For a typical kid, that's one question, and they can think through and say, yep, got it, did the math, did the ELA, did the science, did the social studies. It's really this many questions you're asking. So if each of these things is a cognitive task, you think you've asked one question, you've actually asked all of these things. Because each and every one of these is a separate task for them. And you've seen it, right? That they've got their homework, you sat there, you watched them, they did it. And then you go to school later and there's all these zeros and you're like, we did that. That was done, I know it was done. And then, you find it crammed in the bottom of the backpack with all the other things that you swear they did, along with the granola bar bits and paper clips and the shoe they couldn't find and all the other stuff. Because that was a whole nother task. Doing it is different than getting it in the right folder and then getting it out of that folder and giving it to the teacher. So. All right, so what do? What that is going to start translating to in school and at home is academically, we see these kids, these are bright kids, these are smart kids, but they know their stuff. It just doesn't get where it needs to be, how it needs to be, when it needs to be there. So, they know the social studies, they know the French, they know the math, things like that, but then their grades aren't reflecting what they've learned. Socially, it means they might have difficulty making friends, being appropriate with peers, or if they're appropriate with peers, maybe they have more trouble being appropriate with adults, making plans to socialize. Emotionally, they start to see themselves because of they've tried so hard academically, they're working so hard, and their grades are not reflecting how hard they're working and what they're getting done. Socially, they're not having a lot of luck getting together with friends or having really positive experiences with friends. Eventually, emotionally, they start to see themselves as a bad student, irresponsible, lazy. They've heard that a lot. You need to be more responsible. It seems like, if you applied yourself, that, you get better grades, something like that. So they hear this a lot, and they start to feel like that means they're irresponsible, lazy, not smart, or unlikable. So we need to shift our thinking about what this really means so we can shift their thinking about themselves as students. Responsibility, or being responsible, does not mean being organized and neat. What it means is being answerable or accountable as for something within one's power, control, or management. That's being a responsible person. So keeping a planner the right way is not responsibility. Knowing you're not so great at it and coming up with a different way to make sure that you get done your have-to-dos and get them where they need to go, and being able to ask for help when you need it is responsible. When my son had his first part-time job, he had worked there a while, and the manager said, I'd like to shift you to the closing shift. You'll be on alone and you'll need to close up, lock the door, and there's a whole bunch of stuff you need to do to close, and he walked him through all the 12 different things that he needed to do in order to close if he was going to be on alone. And he said, that's great, I can do all of those things, but I'm not going to remember all of those things, so I'm going to need you to make me a checklist that I can read each time and make sure I do them all. So responsibility isn't waving a magic wand and making them be able to remember those 12 things. It's giving them the skills to say, I can do that. Can you make me a checklist? That's responsibility. So we need to shift what responsibility looks like. It's being accountable for owning what we can do and how we do it. Struggling in school does not mean you're not smart. It means there's a mismatch between what the environment's asking of you and what you are capable of giving. And so strategies that are external, if you don't have it in your internal neurology, having those strategies externally are going to create a better match between what you're being asked to do and what you're capable of doing. It's a bridge or a boost or however you want to envision it. And then being a good student doesn't mean you have naturally strong executive functions. It means you maximize the executive functioning skills you do have, and then you utilize what strategies you need to for the rest of it. And a lot of this is really coming to terms with what you're good at, what you're not good at, and being able to fly your flag. And we need to create communities. They have that community at home. They hear how great they are all the time, and they feel comfortable being themselves at home. And if they have that community built in school too, where they can make mistakes and be who they are without shame or blame, then everybody's going to get a little bit more comfortable saying, you know, I'm not so hot at that. I might need a strategy for that. And that's what we need to teach them to do, to advocate for themselves. All right, so any support that we come up with, we kind of have to keep three things in mind. One is we have to reduce that red bar. So we have to take away some of those clerical executive functioning tasks that eat up all that brain energy, so we can reserve them as much of that green bar as we possibly can, so that they can get to the math and the science and the making of friends and playing the cello and all the great things they love to do. If it's not inside, you can't make it be inside. We can maximize it with good diet, sleep, but you can't create what's not there. So what you have to do is have something outside that's going to recreate what those internal neurological structures do inside. And then remember all of those things that affect the neurology and the way that it progresses. Keep those in mind. And it's going to be a little frustrating because you'll get, you know, on track, things will all seem aligned, and you'll say, okay, we're moving past that, and then you see a backslide. And you have to just remind yourself, all right, we'll just keep strategies in place, we'll keep trying this, and then we'll move forward again. We did notice when my son was in middle school, every time he got his braces tightened, it was on. Just sharp as a tack. And we don't know what it was. Something about having his whole face be achy that kept everything centered, and he just wasn't floating off in different directions. So when we learned that he had to get his braces off, we were very, very disappointed. But he seemed to, you know, what I think about him then as a middle schooler and now what he's doing at almost 21, and it's amazing how much he has. Not only that I've seen his natural executive functionings mature, but the strategies that he adds all the time, some that we gave him when he was younger, some that teachers came up with when he was younger, some he's added by himself, he's killing it, honestly, and you know, so it happens. But a lot of it is still external to him and may never be internal. Right. So, some strategies. These are pretty general. Get you going in the right direction to kind of show you what I mean by if it's not internal, it needs to be external. And then, like I said, feel free to email me so you can get some more ideas that might be very specific to some of the areas where your kids are seeing some difficulties. Planners. So French Road and the middle school have the assigned planners. High school, I think they kind of hope they keep a planner. Some kids, they don't have one that they give to everybody in the high school anymore. Is that true? Am I wrong? My kids don't use one anymore, so I might be others. So they might have one that they can get from the school. But the assigned planner was really difficult for my son, and I know I've heard this from other folks. And one of the main reasons was that the list of subjects in the planner wasn't in the same order as his classes. So what happened was, he opens his planner in the beginning of the day, and he's in ELA, so he writes the ELA assignment on the first line, but that said science. And he didn't notice that, because that's a whole nother task. And so, you know, he'd fill it out as the day went on, but everything was in the wrong column. So then he gets home, and it says, okay, science homework is page 74, problems 1 through 8, and we open that book, and there is no page 74, it's blank. Or it's a photo. I'm like, okay, great, maybe that was the ELA book. And we looked through another one. Maybe it was a social studies book. I said, maybe it was 37. Then he says, maybe it was 37, not 73. I'm like, okay, let's go back through all the books again. And sometimes we hit on it. And it's like, this has got to be it. It has 8 questions. It has a 3 and a 7 in it. Let's do this. And sometimes not. And you just go back the next day and say, I know I wrote it down, but I must have written it down wrong, and now I don't have it. So we had to come up with something that did work. Not being excused from homework, not saying planners don't work at all, but finding one that matched the way his brain was processing. He needed something that was in the same order, because that's how he was filling things out. So now he uses apps a lot on his phone, uses his phone calendar a lot and things like that. But at the time we came up with a customized planner, I bought this from Barnes & Noble. There, I just plugged Barnes & Noble, everybody. And it's just a little notebook, and I created these on my computer in all of my spare time. And ordered it in the same order that he had his classes. I have gray lines for LLR and a gray line for after school, so even though he wasn't getting homework in those classes, he could fill out what he was supposed to work on during that time, in sports study hall or in LLR. And then there's a column for checking it off when it was done, checking it off when it was handed in. Those are separate things, so not just knowing what it was. And he could concentrate more on writing it down correctly because it was in the right line. And fits in your pocket, so it's not a whole other book to remember and carry around. And it doesn't stay closed unless there's a writing implement in it. So it was almost like a reminder. If it was flopping open, he had to remember to put the pencil in it. So I'll pass it around if you want to look at the page more closely because it's little. But that worked, and that was really helpful, and I've recommended that, and I've had people try this and say that was it. It's just pocket-sized helped, in the same order the classes helped. They've adjusted the columns by which they thought would help. If your kid forgets due dates more than they forget to hand it in, maybe that's something that you want on it. So. Luggage tags on things. I know a lot of folks who have tried these and say they find them pretty helpful. Putting a luggage tag on a backpack or a sports bag with a list of things that need to go in it. So this is a mirror image from the photo, but it basically just says backpack, making sure you have your lunch and your homework and your red folder and your math book or something. The trick is you have to change them up. Our brain likes novel things, and you write out a Post-it note and stick it somewhere, and it stays there for so long that you don't even see it anymore. So you have to change it up. So if you have that luggage tag hanging on their backpack for a few weeks, it's going to get old, and they're going to stop seeing it. So then you swap it out with a nice bright yellow one, or something that has, whatever, favorite team on it or favorite character, and just something that catches their attention is what's important. Our brain likes novelty. Pair forgettable items with unforgettable items. So if there's something that they know they're not going to forget, like walking out of the house without their shoes on, which I know happens, but most of the time doesn't, they're not going to forget to go without their shoes. Put the stuff they have to have in their shoes. They can't get it on their foot without taking it out, putting it in their pockets. So while their brains aren't going to naturally remind them of what they need to have, and they're going to have those external reminders, with enough repetition, it does eventually become more second nature. So you'll see they have 4 things in their shoes all the time. They put 1 in each pocket. Then it will move to, if I don't have something in each pocket, I know I'm forgetting something. Which one is it? Oh, I've got it. And then eventually they'll internalize a little bit more what it is they need, and they can stop putting things in their shoes. But hey, maybe they always will. I still put Post-it notes to myself on my windshield. So in the car, I'll go out to the car, put it on my windshield, and go back in because I know I'm going to forget to stop on my way to work unless there's something that I can't see through. So you have to make your brain recognize it. Anything that you can provide to them done already. Pre-head the papers. A lot of stuff on a heading doesn't change, but they have to rewrite it all of the time. It takes so much brain energy for some kids to write out a heading. Their name does not change, often. The class they're taking doesn't change, the period that they have that class doesn't change, the date changes, and the assignment might change. But if you have a lot of that other stuff filled out already and then make photocopies and then just take a sheet and the heading's already there, they can get right to work. Maximize that green bar and shrink that red bar. So it's a pretty simple thing, but it can really go a long way. Something about graph paper and the grid, the boxes, sorting things into those little boxes helps the brain process a little more efficiently. So it's just something else that can maximize that green bar or the brain energy that you have left. Whether you're doing math problems in columns or just writing, and there's grids both ways. It's a graphic organizer of sorts that helps us sort through the information. Pre-formatted Word documents. So the next slide or two, I'm going to talk about anything that can be electronic, the better, because they can't, if it's on a Google Doc or if it's posted online, they can't lose it. It's not like losing a piece of paper. But then we kind of run into the problem of they've got so many documents online, and they're all named document, that it's the same as all those papers in the bottom of a backpack. We've just made it digital. So we have to have something that, I would like to be able to program computers so I could create error messages that won't let them close it out and save it until it says, what subject is this for? What do you want to call this assignment? And then the date and the timestamp's automatic, and then they close it out, and they, or something that will automatically sort it into a folder. Any computer people in here who get on that? Maybe, all right, yeah, let's do it. So, but if you have, and this is what I tell my college students all the time, because they have to use APA format heading all the time. I get the most creative things, and I tell them, do one, keep it, open it. All you have to do is change the date and the title. Your name stays the same, my name stays the same, your college name stays the same, everything else that has to be on it stays the same. Just use it again. All you have to do is swap out your name or swap out the date and the title of your paper, and you don't have to worry about where the lines go. You just figure that out once. And they keep it on their desktop. They open it each time and change it out, and then it saves them a lot of work. They can just use their brain energy for something else. Math toolkits in the high school. Are we familiar with those? Anybody not have math toolkits yet? All right. So the idea is that the kids are solving problems and writing out the answers to problems, the math problems, giving examples, writing a visual, a graph, or a chart, or something like that, answering lots of information about them. But they go in a composition notebook, and they get a worksheet with the problems on, and they have to cut out each problem, tape it into the composition notebook, and then write, and figure out how much they have to have written for that, and whether or not it's a visual or text, and then they tape the next prompt in and things like that. Pedagogically, I don't know enough to know how sound that is, but for kids who struggle with their executive functions, that can be a nightmare. It's really, really difficult to do all of those tasks, and just the cutting and taping it into the composition notebook is going to use enough concentration and energy that they have that much less left for the math problem. So instead of having them transfer stuff into a composition notebook, could it be a 3-ring binder with the pages already formatted? They can see that it's supposed to be a graph. They still have to do the work. They can see that it's supposed to be text. If it's a big box, they know that it's not a short answer, it's going to be a long answer. That kind of gives them the hints. They don't have to leave all the clerical tasks and the guesswork out so much. Mentioned graphic organizers before. Anything that visually represents information visually like this, our brains really like that. It's dendrite food. It creates new neurons in our brain, and it strengthens the pathways between neurons so that information travels around, gets stores better, make nice networks, hold all that information solid. So anything that instead of just reading through texts or taking their notes in texts, if they have a grid they can fill out, flow chart, Venn diagram, something like that, just maximizes our efficiency. More green bar. Assignments that have lots of parts. The difficulty in that is what our executive functions do for us is that they figure out how many parts are in the assignment. We think through, okay, there's 6 parts. I could probably do 1 part a night, so I need at least 6 nights to get that done, or 6 sittings to get that done. If I can only sit down and work on it on Saturdays, it's going to take me 6 weeks to get that project done. I know that it'll take me about an hour to do that part, and so that's what our executive functions do for us. So if that area of our brain is weak, we need something that's going to visually show us that outside of our body. So I've used storyline, that's what I call this thing, breaking up an assignment into chunks, laying them out in a sequence that makes sense to the student, not to you, because how you think of it might be very differently, how you would tackle it might be different, but have them break it into the steps that they want to do in the order that they want to do them. Write one in each one, and as they accomplish each part, color it in. So there's actually a visual reminder of how close they are to the end. Because some kids will fill in the first one, and they'll say, whew, that was a lot of work, I must be done. And they've only done 1/6. Or other kids will get so close to the end and they'll say, I've done so much, I must be done. And they don't realize that there's that one more part to do. So this is actually something, because if you're not being reminded internally, there's something that shows you, nope, look, a little bit more, until they actually get to the end. So this is an example from one I actually found and took a picture of that I dug out of some of our stuff that we colored in, was his application to the New York State Summer School for the Arts. He had to fill out a written application and send in our portfolio on a disc. But what I want to point out here is that this bugged me. I had to give up a little of my control issues here, because he decided these were the 6 things we figured out we had to do in 6 nights before the due date, so we could get everything in by the end of March. To read all of the information and figure out what program we wanted to apply to, and then print out the application forms and everything. Now, to me, filling them out would be the next step, but no, he just wanted to set, printing them out was enough work, and he didn't want to look at them anymore, and we had to set those aside for a couple of nights, and then he wanted to get back to his art. And then after that was accomplished, and he felt good about that. Now he could tackle written forms, because that's harder, a little more drudgery. And then we got everything burned on a disc and in the mail. So figuring out what you can tackle in each step is important, and they might actually have to time themselves. Some kids don't have a good sense of what they can accomplish in a half an hour. They might think it'll take them 10 minutes, and it really takes them 60 minutes. And so even, figuring out how long does a math problem take you? How long does writing a paragraph take you? And then compare that with how long can you sit and work before you need a break. So if they know they can work in 20-minute increments, match that with what you know they can get done in 20 minutes. So I'm doing that time. Or index cards. Put each step on an index card. They've got a pile of each step they have to do or each task they have to do, and when they do one, they pull it off the top. It's very satisfying. Pull one off, rip it up, get rid of it, and then you can see the stack shrinking, and they get there. No, but until that stack is gone, you're not done yet. Working back from due dates. Rubrics need to be visual. Can't necessarily gauge what part of a big project is going to take what amount of time. They might have a sense that the cover page is as much work as the body of the paper, because that's the line on, if the lines on the rubric are the same size, that they're going to think that those parts of the project are the same size. They're not necessarily so. So in this, the cover page might only be 3% of the work. So that might be one sitting. Writing the introduction might be 1, 2, or 3 sittings, depending on how long they can work without a break. So it gives them a gauge that, and then the other thing is they have a history paper due April 25th. That means no homework until April 24th, right? So they have to understand there's multiple parts that are going to, and each part might take multiple nights. So then you have to work backwards. And this is going to give them a real sense of which is the heaviest workload. This was another visual we've used, the sky, the cityscape. Bigger buildings or bigger hunks of the project, the windows or how many details it has to have, whatever works for them. Some kids are more visual, some kids writing it out in text is better. Kind of have to know what their neurological fingerprint is. Electronic cubbies, anything that you can make electronic, the better, because it's not a paper to lose, it's not a book to have to carry back and forth and leave somewhere. Google Docs are great. They really are great. They can't lose it. Even if they forget to save, it still saves. What genius came up with that? Emailing things to yourself. Their email inbox can be a to-do list. Then they got it when they got home. If their planner somehow doesn't make it home, their email will. They just have to have somewhere to access the internet at home. Taking photos of assignments on the board, the notes on the board, and then the book that goes with the assignment. So we can avoid that. I took a picture of page 72, 1 through 8, and then if you don't, take a picture of the book that goes with it after that, it's going to help mom or dad a whole lot. So, helping them get a better sense of time. Again, it might get a little more natural over time. They might get better at it. It might be something they always need help with. So the more strategies that you can teach them to use on their own, the less dependent they're going to be on you or teachers, the more independent they're going to be, just dependent on themselves, which is what you want to do. They might never wean off these strategies. We just want to wean them off other people. So map out what their day looks like and time it. You know, you've got this to do, this to do, this to do, and these are the chunks of time. They might have to always be setting alerts in their phone and planning for travel time. You know what double booking is. In our house, we call it domino booking a lot, where you book everything right up against each other and forget that it's actually a 20-minute drive between those two things. You can't possibly do that. So, and then you're just late for everything for the rest of the day, like a stack of dominoes. So you might have to learn to actually plan the travel time. And that might be something you do forever. Actually schedule an appointment to check your email. People forget, it goes by the wayside, then the list of unread emails gets so long, it's so daunting, and if they have task initiation issues, then the more there are, the harder it gets started, and it's a real snowball. So if twice a day you schedule 10 minutes to look at emails and take care of them as they come, it's much more efficient use of your time and brain energy and much less daunting. And even folks with task initiation can say, oh, I can do 2 emails. But when they see that they've got 25 that are new, they go, oh, later, it goes back out, and it's not going to help because the next time they open it now it's 50. You know. So, and scheduling downtime. You need that to refresh your neurology. So if you've domino booked yourself all day and then you get home to your 50 emails and then everything you have to do at home is a cognitive task, you're going to be exhausted and it just gets harder, and then you wake up the next day and it starts all over and you haven't had any downtime, then you're really not taking care of your brain. So it is important. All right. Social emotional regulation, that other list. So what's happening in our brain dozens and dozens of times a day, every time that we're in a social situation and we get a trigger, is somebody says something to us, our brain says, okay, stop, think about what they said, reach into our experience and our long-term memory and say, oh, these are all the things that I know, all the ways I could respond to what that person said. I'm going to take them all out. I'm going to put them on my desktop. I'm going to decide which one is appropriate. I'm going to pick the right one. That's how I'm going to respond. I'm going to put all the rest of them away where they go. We do that in a fraction of a second, hundreds of times a day. So if any of this is a problem, that's where we see kids blurting out something that's inappropriate, because they couldn't stop and think, or even if they did stop and think, they don't have a whole lot of desk space to take out a lot of options. And then from what they have, they might pick the wrong one, or they didn't store the appropriate responses correctly last time, so when they reached for one, they didn't come up with the one that they hoped for. So a lot can go wrong here. There's a lot of working parts in responding to social situations. Okay? And then emotional control. This gray part at the base here is your limbic system, the base of your brain. That is what generates emotion. Your emotions are all okay. It's constantly generating emotions. It never takes a break. It's just a steam engine and it just keeps going. And so there's constantly, whether it's contentment, happiness, excitement, frustration, anger, the whole range of emotions. They're just all just getting steam engine churned out. And then the front part, the blue part, the prefrontal cortex, that's what decides how to deal with those emotions and express them appropriately. So what happens with, so if you consider the limbic system, the steam engine, and then the prefrontal cortex, the vent or the valve that expresses the emotions, if the steam engine is always going to work, those emotions are always going to get churned out. But if the vent is faulty or doesn't work right, then emotion builds up and you've got it all storing up in there. And so eventually it has to blow. So a lot of times what we say is the kids who we say blow over the tiniest things, that they had, inappropriate behaviors or they, had an exaggerated emotional response to this. It's not that they have worse emotions or more emotions than anybody else. They just have a faulty valve or vent that hasn't been letting them process all along. Things have been building up. So they get to class and it's been a frustrating day and all the teacher says is, okay, time for the quiz, put your stuff away. And they forgot they had a quiz and that could just be the straw. And then they just toss their books on the floor or it's just, that's it, they've had it. And so they're like, oh, that, didn't seem like a behavior that I was expecting. And then it really just all comes down to this, that it wasn't any less appropriate emotion that they were experiencing. It just didn't get let out a little bit at a time. All right. And then, like I said, social adaptability is like set switching from task to task, transitioning across multiple social contexts, or from piece to piece of a highly complex situation like a really crowded dinner party or something like that. Your social adaptability is at rest, it's comfortable, it's hanging out in any predictable or familiar environment. So when your kids are home, that is when they can handle things well. They're comfortable there, they know what's expected of them, things are okay. But that your social adaptability is getting worked anytime that you are somewhere where there's going to be unexpected changes or rapid fire events and you can't process things as they come in quite as quickly. The bus, cafeteria, things that are just a lot of noise, a lot of incoming social cues, things like that. And that's when they're going to be worked the hardest. There's something else on there. All right, so understanding appropriate responses and other perspectives. That's one way that we can help them figure out what's going on. So the same way that we're coming up with academic supports, we can come up with supports that's going to help them work through all of the which social skill to use at which times and how to appropriately respond to things that are happening in the social environment. Carol Gray does a lot of work with social stories. She aims them pretty much for kids who are on the autism spectrum. But a student with any neurologically based disability, autism, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, Tourette's, specific learning disability, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyslexia. They're all neurologically based, so there's going to be an overlap with difficulty in executive functions. So Carol Gray works particularly with kids who are on the autism spectrum, but what she does is write social stories that talks them through a social situation to explain what they can expect, so it's not sudden and unpredictable once they get there. The one I have in mind is for younger kids, but going to a birthday party. When I go to a birthday party, I bring a present. The present is not for me, it's for the birthday boy or girl. I can get excited when they open the present, but I don't get to bring it home with them. I brought it to say happy birthday, and I'm going to leave the present there. There might be balloons, and balloons make loud noise when they pop, and so, it's okay to stay away from the balloons and find another place in the room to sit or something. And it kind of talks them what emotional things they might expect, and it seems less scary, unpredictable when they get there. Perspective exercises, talking them through being in someone else's shoes. It doesn't necessarily come naturally. So really saying, I know you said that and you meant it as a joke, and they got mad, and they're like, yeah, it's that I meant it as a joke and they got mad. They should have known I meant it as a joke. I'm like, well, let's think about it from their perspective. They heard these words and it didn't sound like a joke to them. And it's going to take some practice because they're not used to being able to get outside their head and seeing it from somebody else's perspective all the time. Some kids, not all kids, but if this is a difficulty that they do have, they're going to need some real direct instruction and a lot of practice of thinking about what it's like to be in another person's shoes. And then just like you would map out the parts of a project, map out all the steps it takes to make social plans. A lot of times what happens is they want to do something on Friday night at 7 with a friend and they call them at 10 to 7. And the friend can't do it because they don't have any notice and they already had other plans. And then they feel like nobody wants to do anything with me. I called 3 friends and nobody can do anything tonight. They all are doing stuff, and I'm the only one not doing stuff. So understanding it's not that they don't like you, it's that you gotta give them some notice and work backwards just like you do with a big assignment. Help them reflect on their personal steam engine. What are their triggers? What are the things that churn out emotions? What are ways that you can help your steam engine vent a little bit? Richard Lavoie does something called a social skill autopsy. Well, it's a morbid term. It's the idea of taking a social situation and what happened and breaking it down and finding where it went wrong. All right, here's, like, it was going okay, it was going okay, it was going okay. All right, here's where it started to break down and go off. And then come up with some strategies about recognizing the point that was difficult and what they could have said instead. And then the things that strengthen the vent. Healthy food, sleep, exercise. Some kids playing with fidget toys, not fidget spinners, but like maybe a koosh ball. I have an adult student who likes Matchbox car and spins the wheels on it. And it just, they can focus for a really long time. It's, you know, unless they're really, really agitated, you know, and making noise with it, it's not disruptive, it's small, it's quiet, they keep it in their pocket all day. Some kids like a balloon with sand or flour or rice. Whatever the texture is, it really works wonders. And there's some neurological research behind it that the more senses that we engage at the same time, the better we learn the information that's coming in. So if we're listening to somebody and we're seeing something visual and we're also engaging our tactile sense and handling something, then we're building a stronger neural network to hold that information, which is going to allow us to kind of digest it better, store it better, retrieve it better, and apply it in different situations. So, in a nutshell. Some kids need different seating. Some kids need to stand. The bikes in the library, that is huge. That can be huge. They can, you know, clear out their vent, and then they can go back to class, and they've actually gotten something done because there's a place for a book, and you know that's a great strategy. We get very stuck in the traditional desks and chairs in classrooms, and they don't fit what the human physiology needs all the time. And we got to let kids be aware of what their bodies need. It's called proprioception, being aware of your physical body in space and what it might need. And the same way that some kids need weighted vests or weighted lap pads to kind of it pulls all of their focus to that, so the other sensory stimuli coming in isn't so overwhelming because they've got something weighted down that they're concentrating on. They can kind of filter out some of the more overwhelming things. Maybe that's what was going on with the braces tightening. The same idea that some kids like to turn their chair around and lean against the front of it. They're creating for themselves what feels good and helping them concentrate. So when the first thing we do is say, flip your chair around and sit in it right, we've deprive them of the opportunity to try to figure out their own coping strategies. So kind of let their bodies guide them. You know, when you get kindergartners and they like color on the floor on their arms and they're up on the tables and they've got one knee on, their bodies are just doing what they need to do to be active. And as we get older, we grow out of that a little more, but not entirely. I mean, some of us, like to sit with one foot up under our seat or just, have to be on the couch laying down to read. Let it, just, if we have all those different options in the classroom, kids can find it and they're going to maximize that green bar in the meantime. Arriving first. Can they get to class first? Walking into a classroom with 25 people in it, your red bar goes straight up because you have to process a whole bunch coming in. That can be very stressful. Just walking into the classroom can minimize some of the green bar that you have left. Can they get there first? Can they leave the last class 1 minute early so they can get to their next class early? And then as kids come in one and two at a time, you can process that much better. So there's still 25 kids in the class, but you didn't walk into 25 kids. You walked into a nice quiet classroom where you can get comfy and sit in the seat the way you need to, and then people come filter in, then you can do it much better. More green bar. Same thing in social situations, although time management is not always the folks who show up early, but if you can schedule in your travel time, get yourself there a little bit early, be the first one to arrive, that social situation might be a little bit easier to manage. That's all I got. So it was a lot, I told you. I'm warm up here. So time for questions, anything that general, anything you want me to return to that I talked through too fast?
This has been a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District's PTSA.